Hello, my dear students, and welcome once again to Zenith Academy Online. Today, we are doing a very important chapter from biology, that is the nervous system. So, let's begin, my dear children. So, before studying nervous system, first of all, we should know what is the need of nervous system. Why do we need a nervous system? So, these are the four major functions of nervous system that you should know from the examination point of view. Okay, so the first one is it keeps us informed. It keeps us informed about what? About the outside world through the sense organs. So the sense organs also come under nervous system. So the first major function is it keeps us informed about the outside world through the sense organs. Second, it enables us to remember, to think, and to reason out. Third one, it controls and harmonizes all the voluntary muscular activities. Voluntary muscular activities are those activities which are under our control. Okay. So, our nervous system helps us to control and harmonizes all the voluntary muscular activities like running or holding a book, etc. Okay. The fourth function is it regulates involuntary activities. Involuntary activities are those activities which are not under our control. For example, breathing, our heart beating, etc. So even while we are sleeping, it is happening automatically, right? So our nervous system regulates the involuntary activities also, such as breathing or beating of heart, without our thinking about them. So these are the four major functions of nervous system. Now let's start our chapter by first understanding a neuron or a nerve cell, which is the unit, the basic unit of our nervous system. The smallest unit of our nervous system is a neuron. So let's talk about the structure of the neuron. Just a second, I'll take a pen. Okay. So three main parts of neuron are the cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. Okay, so children, so you can see this is a cell body. This part is known as a cell body. Okay, then can you see these projections outside? Okay, can you see these projections? These are dendrites and the long part is known as axon. So let's study about these structures in detail. First, let's talk about cell body. Okay, we are talking about cell body. Just let me change the color. Okay. So cell body, perikaryon or cytosol. These are the other names of the cell body. Cell body is also known as perikaryon. Okay, where peri means surrounding and karyon means nucleus. So it is surrounding a nucleus. So that is why it is very clear from the name itself that it contains a well-defined nucleus which is surrounded by a granular cytoplasm. The cytoplasm, which is rough, granules are there. Okay. Now it has all the cell organelles like other cells. Only centrosome is absent. Okay. You can see here in the diagram, you can see rough endoplasmic reticulum, free ribosomes, Golgi apparatus, mitochondria. See, you can see mitochondria. You can see Golgi apparatus here. There is a well-defined nucleus in the center. Okay. Ribosomes are there. Every cell organelle is there except from centrosome. You know where centrosome is used, right? In last term we studied about cell division and everything. So centrosome is absent here because now cells have lost the ability to divide. Nerve cells do not divide. Okay, that is why centrosome is not required. I hope this is clear. So, cell body, the other name is perikaryon or cyton. Peri means surrounding and karyon means nucleus. So, it has a well-defined nucleus. Around the nucleus, there is granular cytoplasm. It is containing granules like ribosomes, etc. And it has all the cell organelles like other cells. You can see there is one more diagram here I have shown. Okay. This is a 3D type of an image where you can see the nucleus, you can see the ribosomes, you can see mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, everything very clearly. Okay, let's go ahead. Now let's talk about dendrites. Okay, dendrites, where dendron means tree or branch. So you can see this branch tree-like structures. Okay, these are known as dendrites. Okay, so these are branched cytoplasmic projections of the cell body. So if you see this very carefully, okay, so the cell body का ही cytoplasm देखो extend हुआ है. You can see it is not something like this कि ऐसा cell नहीं है और बाहर ऐसे sun rays नहीं है. No, it is something like this. Can you see? These are projections from the cell itself. Okay, so these are the projections from the cytoplasm itself. Can you see here in detail? See. Okay, so dendrites, dendron means tree or branch. These are cytoplasmic projections of the cell body. This is very important to remember. Okay, and they conduct nerve impulses to the cyton. This is very important. This is the function of dendrites. They conduct the nerve impulse to the cyton. You will understand in the coming slides what is a nerve impulse and everything. Okay, now let's talk about axon. Okay, this is axon, the long structure. This is known as axon. Okay, so it is a long process from the cell body. It varies in size from few millimeters to even more than 1 meter in length. It can be so long. So few axons are only a few millimeters, but few axons are very long, right? In most the neurons, in most of the nerve cells, neuron is nerve cells. In most neurons, the axon is surrounded by a white insulating sheet known as myelin or medullary sheath. Can you see here? Myelin sheath. Can you see this? Covering. Yeah. So it is something like this. See, this is the axon and there's an outer covering like this. Right? I'm showing you a cross section when I cut it through. So it looks like this. Okay, a full covering. Okay, so this is a white insulating sheet known as myelin or medullary sheath, which is covered by an outermost thin sheet called neurolemma. So outside the myelin sheath, there is an outermost covering known as neurolemma. Okay, axon is clear. So axon is a long process from the cell body. It varies in size from few millimeter to even 1 meter in length. Okay, in most of the neurons, the axon is surrounded by white insulating material. Okay, insulating sheet, basically known as myelin or medullary sheath. The spelling is sheath, S-H-E-A-T-H, which is covered by outermost thin sheet called neurolemma. So let's talk more about the axon. The myelin sheath shows gaps throughout the length, which are called nodes of Ranvier. Can you see? This is not a continuous sheet which is covering it. Can you see the breaks here? Okay. So the gaps are known as nodes of Ranvier. Now some axons may have side branches called collaterals as well. So this is a straight line, but sometimes they might have side branches as well. These side branches are known as collaterals. So I'll show you the diagrams where the axons will have collaterals in the coming slides. The end portions of the axon have swollen ends like bulbs which store certain chemicals called neurotransmitters. Can you see these axon terminals? Okay, can you see these bulb-like structures out here? So end portions of the axons have swollen ends. Okay, why they are swollen? Swollen ends like bulb because they store certain chemicals called neurotransmitters. Okay, axon terminals are closely placed near the dendrites of another one or more neurons. Now these are placed near, okay, they are placed very near to the other neurons like this. Are you getting it? So these are the other neurons. So they are placed very close to the other neurons, placed near the dendrites of another one or more neurons, but are not connected. They do not touch each other. I will show you when I am teaching you synapse. Such gaps in between are called synaptic clefts. Okay, what are they known as? Synaptic cleft. क्या होते हैं बेटा synaptic clefts? The gaps between the axon terminal and the dendrites of the other neurons is known as synaptic clefts. Syn means together, okay, syn means together, and apse means gap or a window, okay, synaptic clefts. So now let's talk about the basic terms in the nervous activity. If we know the basic terms, we'll be able to understand the concept really well. Now this basic term is there in the reduced portion. It has been cancelled basically, but you should know what are the basic terms in nervous activity. So let me tell you what is a stimulus. Okay. So an agent or a sudden change of the external or the internal environment that results in change in an organism or any of its body parts. So if there is a change in the external environment, or suppose there's some wind or there's some fire, okay, or any environmental change is there which results in our change, the change in our body, then it is known as stimulus. Can you see an example here? Here this person has accidentally touched a hot pan. Okay, so what you can say, wait, I want to erase this. So what you can say, what is a stimulus? The hot pan, the hotness is a stimulus. Because of it, what happened? There was a sudden change in the organism. He has touched that hot, and then there is a sudden change in the muscles. Yes, he has left it immediately. Whenever you touch some hot object, do you keep on holding it? No, you just leave it immediately, right? So that's a stimulus. Now here if you see, when you see a glass of water in front of you, when you're thirsty and when you see a glass of water in front of you, okay, what happens? Your eyes are the receptors. It is sending the information to the brain, and then you just pick that glass up and drink, right? So what was the stimulus which made changes in your body parts? It told your hands to stretch, the muscles here, muscles stretch, and you were able to drink it, right? So the stimulus was a glass of water, right? So an agent or a sudden change of the internal or external environment that results in change in an organism or any of its body parts. So now what is response? So we have touched the hot body. So the hot body was the stimulus. Now what is response? The change in the organism resulting due to stimulus. So whatever change is experienced or whatever change happens in the organism, that is known as a response. Okay. So now the stimulus was hot pan, and when you just left it, okay, you opened your hand, you left it, that was your response. Okay. Similarly, you drank the water by holding the glass in your hand, you drank the water, that was your response. Now what is impulse? A wave of irritability or electrical disturbance that sweeps over the nerve cell. Now why all this has happened? You have seen something and you're seeing water and you're drinking it. So when you have seen that water, the nerves, okay, here you see the diagram. Okay, there is a sensory neuron and a relay neuron and a motor neuron. So this message goes through the nerves to the brain, and then brain sends the message to the muscles of your hand to contract and pick up that glass of water, right? So this wave, okay, can you see this? The wave of irritability, or you can say an electrical disturbance that sweeps over the full nerve cell. Can you see this nerve impulse? Okay, can you see this? This is an impulse, right? So a wave of electrical disturbance that sweeps over the nerve cell is known as an impulse. Now what are receptors? The specialized epithelial cells which on receiving the stimulus set up the waves of impulse towards the central nervous system. Now when you are touching a hot object, so this skin, okay, this part of your finger, there are epithelial cells. Now they have received the stimulus, and they have set up the waves of impulse towards the central nervous system, and then you get the message to, either withdraw your hand or whatever. So the specialized epithelial cells which on receiving the stimulus sets up the waves of impulse towards the central nervous system. So in this case, the epithelial cells of your hand are the receptors. Okay, and in this case the epithelial cells of your eyes are the receptors. Now what are effectors? जहाँ पे effect पता चलता है. So the muscles, effectors are most of the time muscles or the glands in our body. Okay, so the muscles or glands which on receiving the impulse from the brain or the spinal cord contract or secrete substances. So here if you see, the receptor, the stimulus is heat, the receptor was the epithelial cell. Okay, it gave the nerve impulse inside. Now from the brain or the spinal cord, your muscles will get an indication that okay, now you have to contract. Okay, so the muscles have contracted and then you withdraw your hand. So these muscles, okay, are the effectors. Similarly, when you see a desert in front of you, or when you see a dish that you love in front of you, so what happens? You start salivating, right? Understood? So your brain or the spinal cord has sent the signals to your salivary glands, okay, to secrete saliva because it wants to eat it, right? So that are known as effectors. So effectors are mostly muscles or glands. Now muscles will contract and glands will secrete the hormones or the substances, right? These are known as effectors. So here the effector was muscle cells. Here also in the first diagram also the effector was muscle cells. Now let's talk about the transmission of nerve impulse. Are you all ready? Excited? Let's talk about transmission of nerve impulse. Now you see the first diagram here, out here. Okay, see the first diagram here. So in the normal condition or the resting condition we call, the outer side of the nerve fiber carries a positive charge. So whenever there is a nerve, okay, the outer side of the nerve carries a positive charge. Can you see? This is a nerve, this yellow colored, pale yellow colored, and outer side is all positive. Here also positive, here also positive. So this is a resting region in which the nerve fiber is said to be polarized. This is called a polarized state. Now this polarization is due to, why it is polarized? Because there is more sodium ions outside the axon. Okay, so outside every axon there is more sodium ion. Because of that, more positive is outside and negative is inside. Now whenever you get an stimulation, okay, wait, my pen is sudden. On stimulation, the mechanical on stimulation, okay, either the stimulation can be mechanical or it can be electrical or it can be chemical or it can be heat, etc. You know what can be stimulations, right? The axon membrane at that spot becomes more permeable to sodium ions. Now suppose you have got here, you have touched something hot, okay, or you have got an electric shock or something has hit you. So there's a stimulation. So what happens? Now here can you see, earlier it was sodium ions. Now the sodium ions move in. This layer becomes permeable. So the sodium ion moves in. तो ये positive अंदर चला गया. So बाहर क्या आ गया? Negative. Right? So which move inwards? The sodium ions move inwards and cause the loss of polarization. Now polarization has been lost. So this part, this thing is known as a depolarization. This is known as the excited region. Okay, this region is known as an excited region, and here now depolarization has occurred. So same thing I have told you, depolarization. Now meanwhile, the previous area becomes repolarized. Now what happens? This goes ahead. Okay, this shifts ahead, and the previous area, this area becomes repolarized due to active transport of sodium ions again to the outside. Okay, so after sometimes what happens, this passes, the impulse passes ahead. Okay, so the impulse is passed ahead and this portion becomes repolarized. What does it become? It becomes repolarized. Just a second, children. Okay, so previous area becomes repolarized because again the sodium ions have been transported outside. This is known as active transport of sodium. Okay, let me take out a pen. Okay, देखो क्या हो गया है, this sodium ions again outside, active transport of sodium ions again outside. Okay, sodium ions again comes outside, so this has again become polarized, so repolarized, and this part has moved ahead. Now the same will continue, it will go in front. Okay, it will go like that, and this will again become repolarized. So can you see, earlier this was excited region and this was resting region, resting region. Now what has happened, the excited region has moved ahead and this becomes recovery region. ये तो resting region था ही, this is known as recovery region, and this is again repolarized. So this transport is achieved by what is called sodium pump. Okay, sodium pump की वजह से this has again become repolarized, sodium has gone out again. Okay, and the sodium pump works only by using adenosine triphosphate, that is using the energy through ATP. It requires energy. Okay, the sodium pump requires energy. I hope you guys have understood. So what is conduction of nerve impulse? It is a wave of depolarization followed by repolarization. Can you see in this particular diagram? Okay, so whenever there is a stimulus, so you see sodium ions have moved inside, so it has depolarized. Again it went ahead and it has, this portion has repolarized. Right, this is depolarized. Why it repolarizes? They can ask you why it repolarizes. Because sodium again moves to the outside through active transport of sodium through the sodium pump by using ATP. Okay. Now note that do not compare conduction of nerve impulse in a nerve fiber with the flow of electricity. Okay. Now flow of electricity through an electric wire is completely different, my dear children. Never compare conduction of nerve impulse with electricity flow. Why? Because in the flow of electricity, the electrons do move. Electrons move karte hain along the wire. Okay. Whereas in this case of nerve impulse, neither any substance nor any electrons or ions. ठीक है, ना तो कोई substance, ना कोई electrons, ना कोई ions. Nothing moves along the nerve fiber. Okay, they do not move along the nerve fiber. Now, if we compare the speed of nerve impulse and speed of electricity, what it is? Electricity is conducted through a wire at the speed of 1,50,000 kilometer per second. But the nerve impulse travels in a maximum speed of around only 100 meters per second. Okay. So electricity 1,50,000 kilometer per second, whereas nerve impulse is 100 meter per second. Okay. Now let's talk about synapse. Okay, synapse. What is synapse? So see here, synapse is the point of contact between the terminal branches of the axon of a neuron with the dendrites of another neuron separated by a fine gap. Now do you see this first neuron here? So neuron ka end, okay, terminal branch of a axon of a neuron. Can you see this end? Okay, this end. So when it comes in contact with the dendrites of another neuron, can you see the dendrite of another neuron is approaching it? Okay, here you can see. And they are separated by a fine gap. They do not touch actually. Okay, they are very close. Okay, they are separated by a fine gap. Okay, so this synapse is a point of contact between the terminal. You can see this is the terminal branch and this is the dendrite of another. So point of contact doesn't mean कि वो उसको touch कर रहा है. So this is where these two meet. These two are very close to each other. Okay. So this is presynaptic neuron. You can see I told you that they have these swollen things have neurotransmitters. So they transmit their neurons. Okay, and these dendrites will have receptors. They will receive it. This much is not in our portion. Just understand that synapse is a point of contact between terminal branches of an axon of a neuron with the dendrite of another neuron. Okay, so what happens here, actually you can see in this diagram, this is trying to explain you that the nerve impulse, okay, jumps into the next neuron. So how is, see, we know that there are neurons attached, okay, they are long neurons. So it has to send the signal to the brain very quickly. Brain has to send the signal to all the glands or the muscles, the connected glands or muscles, right? So, but they are not joined together. So they have a small gap. Can you see? So from this gap, the nerve impulse jumps into the other neuron. And this is, my dear children, a chemical process. As the impulse reaches the terminal end of an axon, a chemical acetylcholine is released. You have to learn the name of this chemical. This chemical is released. Acetylcholine is released. Now this chemical sets a new impulse in the dendrites of the adjacent neurons. So when this chemical is released, okay, it sets a new impulse in the dendrite of the adjacent neurons. Now the chemical is soon broken down by an enzyme to make the synapse ready for the next transmission. So inside here again chemical reactions takes place, okay, and acetylcholine is broken down by the enzyme to make the synapse ready for the next transmission in the dendrite of the next neuron. Have you understood? So don't be confused. You just have to remember that what is the role of the synapse. Synapse is a point of contact. You can see here it's a point of contact between the terminal branches of one axon with the dendrites of the other neuron. Okay, they are separated by a fine gap. Now here the nerve impulse from this one will jump into the next neuron, and this is a chemical process. The impulse reaches the terminal end of the axon. इसके terminal पे reach करेगा, फिर एक chemical बनेगा acetylcholine, okay, that will be released, and this chemical goes here. This sets a new impulse in the dendrite of this neuron, the next neuron, and enzymes work upon it and they break it down to make the synapse ready for the next transmission. Now let's talk about different types of neurons. So children, there are three types of neurons: sensory neurons, motor neurons, and association neurons. Association neurons are also known as connecting neurons. So in CBSE books, you will see sensory, motor, and connecting. Okay, it is known as interconnecting neurons also. Okay, so sensory neurons, motor neurons, association or connecting neurons, right? Let us start with sensory neurons. Okay, so what is the function of a sensory neuron? So suppose there is some hot object and we have touched it. So the epithelial, these cells, I told you that these are called receptors. So the neurons, the nerves inside, okay, the neurons, one single nerve cell is known as neuron. So neuron, this type of neurons which are present here at the receptors, they are known as sensory neurons. They convey the impulse from the sense organ to the main nervous system, that is brain or spinal cord, the receptor. Okay. So these, they look something like this. Can you see here? Okay. The cell body is in the side. Can you see a sensory neuron? It is a little different. Now see, this is a motor neuron. This is how we have drawn the diagram for the neuron, right? So motor neuron looks exactly like this. They carry the impulse from the main nervous system. Now from the brain or the spinal cord, these are the ones who are carrying the impulse to the effector muscle. So to the muscles it is carrying and telling it to, withdraw the hand. Are you getting it? So coming back to sensory neurons will be the neurons which are present here in the finger when you are touching a hot object, right? And it conveys the impulse from the sense organ, that is from this skin, to the main nervous system. Okay. Motor neurons will carry the impulse from the brain or the spinal cord to the effector. Okay. So it carries the impulse from the main nervous system to an effector, which can be a muscle or a gland. So here you can see in the diagram, from the brain it is carrying the impulses, okay, to the muscle or the gland, giving the impulse, giving the information to muscle. Now, what are connecting neurons? These are located in the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, these are located in brain and the spinal cord which interconnect the sensory and the motor neuron. अब sensory यहाँ से information लेके आया, ठीक है, इस वाले ने इसको connect किया, brain में है ये. I will show you a diagram and motor nerves will again go to the organ. See here, these are the different 3 types of neurons. This is how you will identify it. You can see that interneuron or the connecting neuron does not have a myelin sheath, right? So you will be able to identify interneuron or association neuron. Okay, this is association neuron. You will be able to identify motor neuron. It is the normal neuron ka diagram that we have drawn. And this is where the cell body is in the middle. Okay. I hope you guys have understood. So you can see this is how the nerve impulse, this is the flow of the nerve impulse. In motor neuron it's like this, in interneuron to dono same hai, and here it is like this. So now you see here, this is the sensory receptor. If you bring your finger close to a candle, okay, if it is close to the candle and if the hotness increases suddenly, what do? You just lift your finger like this. So from here the sensory neuron is taking the information, है ना? I told you sensory neuron will take the information from the receptor to the brain. ये देखो, this is the spinal cord. This is reflex action diagram that I have used, reflex. Okay, so now here can you see this? This is an interneuron. Interneuron is something like this, interneuron. It is there in the spinal cord which is connecting the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. Right, this black part. Now this blue one is showing you motor neuron. It is taking the information to the muscles. यहाँ के muscles पे लाया and it is telling them to contract. So when these muscles contract, you will lift your hand. Okay, and this happens within fraction of seconds. Right? I hope this diagram is very clear to you. The first one is sensory neuron, the interconnected interneuron. Okay, this neuron, जो बीच वाला neuron है, it will always be in the spinal cord or the brain. So you will be able to identify. It connects the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. Okay, now that we have understood what are neurons, let us talk about nerves. Many students get confused in neurons and nerves. Okay, nerve is nothing but a bundle of neurons. A bundle of nerve fibers is known as nerves. So a nerve, one single nerve, is a bundle of many nerve fibers of separate neurons and closed in a tubular sheath. Can you see it like this? This red and blue are the blood vessels. Okay, don't get confused. There are blood vessels also in the nerves. And these are the bundles of nerve fibers. Okay, can you see? I have taken this out to show you a nerve cell. There is myelin shield. Can you see? Myelin shield, blue color myelin shield. Right, so nerves are thread-like white structures. Okay, nerves are white in color from the external. When you see a nerve, it is white in color, which emerges from the brain and the spinal cord and branch out to almost all parts of the body. Now, a nerve may be compared to an underground electric cable containing numerous conducting wires, and each one is insulated from one another. Right, can you see here? These can be considered as one bundle और ये दोनों एक दूसरे से insulated है. Right? Can you see this connective tissue which is insulating it? Okay. The myelin shield of the axon acts like an insulation. Can you see here this myelin shield? It is acting like an insulation for each of the nerve fiber. Okay. And prevents mixing of impulses. You know, there are so many nerve fibers, they are taking impulses up and down. Right? So if there are so many impulses crossing each other, तो short circuit जैसा हो जाएगा, right? The way when wires cross, there is the short circuit. Also in the nerves, if there was no myelin shield, then it might happen that the impulses may mix. So this is one of the major functions of myelin shield, to prevent mixing of impulses in adjacent axons. Is that clear, my dear children? What is the function of myelin shield? It acts as an insulation and prevent the mixing of impulses in the adjacent axons. So this is what nerve is. Bundle of nerve fibers of separate neurons closed in tubular sheath. Okay, it is a wide structure which emerges from the brain and the spinal cord and branches to almost all the parts of the body. It can be compared to an underground electric cable containing numerous conducting wires and each is insulated. In the same way, myelin sheath is helpful here. It acts as an insulation. Now let's talk about types of nerves. The way we had types of neurons, same is the type of nerves, but here it is a bundle. So sensory nerves contain only sensory fibers or sensory neurons. ठीक है, तो सब sensory neurons का जो bundle है, that is known as sensory nerves, bringing impulses from the receptors to the brain or spinal cord. For example, optic nerve arising from the eye and ending in the brain. You know, why are you able to see a particular thing? Because optic nerve from this, whenever you draw the diagram of a eye, you have always drawn optic nerve, remember? So optic nerve is a sensory nerve. It contains sensory fibers only and it brings that, it takes the impulses from the eye and sends it to the brain. Okay, so example of a sensory nerve can be an optic nerve. Next is motor nerve. Okay, it contains only motor fibers carrying impulses from the brain. Now when you see an object, the impulse from the brain come, okay, and if you remember physics, okay, eye is a convex lens. It sees it will form an inverted image on the retina, right? So when brain is sending you information that it is a straight, उसको straight मानते हैं, तो brain से जो impulse आ रहा है, वो impulse कौन लेके आ रहा है? मोटर nerve लेके आ रही है, right? So it contains motor fibers carrying impulses from the brain or spinal cord to the effector organ, muscles or glands to bring them into action. For example, a nerve arising from the brain and supplying the muscles of the eyeball for rotating the eye. Now sometimes what happens, you see a bright light, okay, you see a bright light. So what does your sensory nerve do? It takes the signal to the brain. Now the big brain, from the brain, now the motor nerves are arising. Can you see the motor nerves are arising and telling your eyeball, okay, the muscles of your eyeball to close down so that your eyes are not affected by the bright light or narrow it down, right? So these are motor nerves. Next, mixed nerves. So what are mixed nerves now? They are those that contain both sensory and motor fibers. For example, a spinal nerve. So spinal nerve can be an example of mixed nerves. Now mixed nerves are present also many places. Now this can be your muscles, the muscles of your hand. अगर hand पे कुछ जल जाता है, mostly epithelial cells are the nerves, sensory nerves that takes the information here. But sometimes the muscle can also have mixed nerves. तो touch भी muscle में ही हुआ है और effect भी muscle में ही हुआ है. Effect muscle ने इसको stretch, contract किया है, right? Similarly, spinal nerve, okay, spinal, the nerves in our spines are mixed nerves which contains both sensory and motor fibers. Remember, example of a mixed nerve is a spinal nerve. Now what is a ganglia? Ganglia is a plural word. The singular is ganglion. Okay. Now these are aggregates of nerve cells. हम बोलते हैं ना गुच्छा, a group. Aggregates of nerve cells or cell bodies from which the nerve fibers may arise or enter into. Now here can you see these two swollen parts? ठीक है, ये आगे का है और ये dorsal root ganglion है. यहाँ से can you see this is a aggregate of nerve cells. From here they either arise, the nerve fibers may arise and they can also enter into this. So इसमें enter भी हो सकता है, right? So this is the cross section of spinal cord where I have shown you two examples. Where do you see a ganglia? Ganglia is an aggregate of nerve cell. Now I'll show you one more example. You can see basal ganglia in the brain. Okay, here also the millions of nerve cell bodies are there in this. So it is an aggregate of nerve cell basically. Have you all understood this? There are millions of nerve cell or nerve bodies here. So this is known as ganglia. So what is ganglia? It is an aggregate of nerve cell. So if you see the previous example, not this one. This is a ganglia. This is a ganglia. Okay. From which there are many nerve cells here. and nerve fibers may arise and enter into this. Okay. Now our next part of the video, the next video that I will come up with tomorrow will be on the different nervous systems. So tomorrow we will be talking about central nervous system. Central nervous system contains brain and spinal cord. And then there is a nervous system known as peripheral nervous system, which contains ganglions and all the nerves basically. Okay. So the nervous system is broadly classified into two types of nervous system. There are two types of nervous system. First is central nervous system, which contains brain and spinal cord. Next, the second nervous system is peripheral nervous system. Now, peripheral nervous system is again divided into two. There is something known as somatic nervous system, which is voluntary skeletal muscles. And then there is something known as autonomic nervous system. So, autonomic nervous system controls the involuntary muscles, etc. Okay. Now, autonomic also is divided into two parts. It contains parasympathetic and sympathetic. So, nervous system is broadly classified into two, central and peripheral. Peripheral is again classified into two, somatic, autonomic. Autonomic is again divided into two, parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So we'll be talking about all these in detail in our coming videos, in our coming lectures. So that was all for today. Today, what we did, we spoke about what is the need of the nervous system. We talked about neuron, the structure of neuron. Okay. Then we spoke in detail, we spoke about axon, dendrites, cell bodies. Okay. Then we spoke about synapse. We spoke about what are nerves, what are the three different types of nerves. And now we will continue from the next chapter, from the next video, the major divisions of the nervous system. I hope this was very clear to you. If you have liked the video, please give your thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel and share this with all your friends. Bye bye, my dear children.